Welcome back to the Design Build Hunt podcast, which is presented by Whitetail Partners. I've got Dylan from Kansas and Jake with me. Guys, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you, Josh?
Good.
Doing pretty well. I'm excited to be doing a podcast. Jake, I joked with you earlier. I feel like it's been 3 months since I've seen you.
Mm-hmm. It's been a while.
Like, it feels not right. It feels not right. It's been a long time.
It's good to be back, though.
It's good to be back. You know what this is doing for your fame, Jake? I mean, this is really this is putting your name out there. Yeah, it's getting late. I worked in the hot sun all day today, so it's not a good night for me.
It is hot.
Yeah, it's killer right now. I think it was 95 here today, and I was working in the blazing sun. We were putting up blinds all day.
Oh my gosh!
And man, I sure could have used some shade and a breeze. That would have been real nice. But Dylan, you guys have had some hot temps too, huh?
Yeah, we've been pretty lucky, really, with the moisture and pretty unseasonably cool there for a long. I mean, the few spells here and there, but I waited right until the hottest days possible to get some fall plots in, and definitely feeling the effects of that. And kind of felt like I played a football game or fought a house fire or something. It was like back in the cramping days again. It was just like, but it's worth it. That's the struggles we do to kind of try to stack the odds in our favor, I guess.
That's right. Well, quick question before we get into today's topic, which is going to be all about harvesting does, which I'm super excited and interested to hear your take on them. I'm getting a lot of pictures on Instagram and stuff. Because baiting is legal here, and so there's corn everywhere. People are sending me pictures of their bait sites, and they're like, "Do you think I have too many does? Do you think I need to shoot some does?" And that's a really tough question to answer, especially if you have a bait site out, because every doe in the neighborhood's coming there. Like that's kind of a tough call to make. But I do want to get there. But first, we're talking about. You just mentioned getting your plots in, Dylan. Have either of you guys ever used a Harley rake in putting in your plots? It's an attachment that can go on a skid steer that kind of disturbs the ground. I forget what it's a soil conditioner or something like that they call it. Have either of you guys ever seen or used one of those?
I have not. No.
All of my nope. I've got a lot of redneck implements. I haven't heard of that one, Josh.
All right. Well, this isn't a redneck implement. This is one you cannot afford. But you can rent one, and we've been using a skid steer for a lot of stuff around the project here lately. And thought, man, while that thing's here, I might try one of those out. So I wanted to see your guys' opinion. I should have asked y'all that off air. That way, I didn't just get a no and then have to move on. But hey,
nope,
it is. Nope. Go look for YouTube videos, which is what I've been doing. Some people do it, and I think the general consensus is folks are like, yeah, it's great, but we can't justify the expense. I already have a disc, or disc harrow. I don't need to add one more piece of equipment that's going to be really expensive. But all right, let's talk about does then. That's why we're here. Both of you both work with clients. You both have your own places. You both love to hunt. What are your thoughts on shooting does? Like, when do you try to do it? How often do you try to do it? I think both of you may have a little bit of a different take on this. So Dylan, let's kick it off with you. Let's talk about hunting does. How often are you going out for a doe mission?
I am personally not, Josh, and that's actually kind of evolved over the years. I'll say it was fairly common for people to hunt does back up until probably the late 90s, I want to say, is when they increased the numbers kind of to a level. I don't know. A lot of people claimed insurance and that kind of pressure, but it actually got to where, and our herds aren't near the number of even neighboring states like Missouri and Iowa. We're a third of their numbers anyway, but our buck to doe ratio actually is really pretty strong. I don't know exactly. I mean, it's got to be close to 1-to-1 where I hunt. And so they're like gold for the areas that I hunt, but I do have some clients in areas that they do get a little bit populated, some of the river stuff and that kind of thing, where there just seems to hold a lot more. And so there's a need down there or in those type of places, or some places where maybe you have a little bit of a overabundance of food maybe, and you might have that issue. But that's what I'd be cautious of, at least around us, is some of the shifting and some of that summer pressure and summer feed, is going to kind of be a little bit inflated compared to what the reality is once they disperse. So, I would be more in favor probably of setting up food somewhere early, far away to where you can actually draw it to where you're not disturbing if you're going to go early season. That's what I do remember, just basically on some of those designs that we've worked on, is kind of setting it up to where it's not going to be an issue. Or maybe somewhere, a lot of farmhouses, you can draw in does and smaller bucks typically throughout the year, or in maybe some orchards that aren't necessarily set up where you're hunting. Those are great places to key on taking out some does if you need to. I would probably favor the late season. The only problem around here for late season is it's typical for a lot of our bucks to get run pretty ragged during the rut, and they'll shed. And so a lot of people have a tough time distinguishing that, and go for that lone big body deer in the field that ends up having some big pedicles when they get up close to him. And that's always a kind of a bummer for everybody. But
Yeah. So
yeah, I kind of wish we had that problem though. I do like just the fact of kind of building up some of that for season, and kind of it helping you as somebody that's working towards settling your nerves and going through your shot processes and stuff. I think there's some value there. Plus, for the needy and that kind of thing, I think there's a lot of people, if you've got enough venison and have a need to get the harvest under control, I think there's some good opportunities there for helping those in need.
Right. Very good. Jake, tell me about your thoughts on harvesting does. Are you in a little bit different situation than Dylan is here?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple properties that I've hunted over the years that are in a very similar situation to Dylan, and where we don't really have a lot of deer per square mile. So I would say when you're trying to harvest does, you really want to make sure that the deer per square mile, they don't exceed the carrying capacity of that area. So you don't ever have too many deer in the area, and every area is going to be a little bit different. Some areas are going to be able to support more deer than others, but you don't ever want to exceed that carrying capacity. And there are going to be like identifiers that you can look at throughout the course of the season, throughout the course of the year. And you kind of touched on this off air a little bit. We can probably get into that, but things that you can cues that you can look at to say I have too many deer here. But so there's one property that I have the privilege of hunting that has probably too many deer. It's probably just above average, just above that carrying capacity. So we don't have to go crazy on our doe harvest, but we do have to harvest a few does every single year, along with our neighbors, just to kind of keep it in check. And then the property here, where I live, 50 acres here, we do not have a lot of deer in this area for one reason or another. So this is going to be the third hunting season here, and as of right now, this could obviously change throughout the course of the season, but as of right now, I don't plan on shooting does this year. But again, that could change this year if I start seeing more, or it could change in 2 years. So that it's always going to be different depending on how many deer you're seeing, the carrying capacity, or you just don't you don't want to ever exceed that carrying capacity. So for me, that's kind of what
Right.
it all boils down to. So some properties, yes, some like a lot. Like I have a guy, one of my buddies. He's near a population center, Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's just outside of Grand Rapids, so a lot of houses. He's kind of like just in like the country outside of Grand Rapids, and him and his neighbors, I think they shot over 100 does. I forget how
Wow.
many acres they have. I don't know if it's 500 acres, maybe a little bit more, but yeah, they shot over 100 does last year, and and they still think that they have. I hope I don't get this wrong, but 100 to 200 deer per square mile. So they
Yeah.
still have a lot of work to do over there, but they are going heavy on the does. I don't even think they shot a buck last year. Like all the guys in this group, all the properties involved in this, they didn't shoot a buck, and they shot that many does, and they still have way too many deer. So like that's an
Wow.
extreme example on one side, but then there's other properties that don't have hardly any deer. So then you need to kind of lay off, let if the goal is to have more deer. And then there's other properties that are right in the middle. That's where most of us are, where you have to harvest a few does every year just to kind of keep it in check.
Right. And what I hope folks take away from this is it's situational.
Yep.
You've got to be paying attention to your habitat. You've got to be paying attention to your deer. Hopefully, you're tracking things like body weight on a deer when you're skinning them out. Hopefully, you're looking at fat contents of around the, let's say, the kidneys or something like that, or do they have a nice thick pad of fat on their back or whatever when you're cutting them up. But um, what are some of those telltale signs that you're telling clients to look out for, or maybe that you're looking for when you get onto a property to decide whether or not they actually have too many deer. And one of the reasons I asked this question, it's easy to look at a food plot photo or easy to look at a feeder photo and say, wow, there's way too many deer. And that may not actually be the case. That may just be a drawing point, a pretty significant drawing point on your property. They may be far more dispersed, or, depending on time of year, they may disperse quite a bit, like Dylan was saying earlier. So, what are some of those things that you're looking for when you're on a property to help someone decide whether or not they need to harvest more does?
Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
go ahead. You go ahead, Dylan.
you're good. Well, I was just going to mention, some of those that I've noticed are more like the browse line. It's pretty evident when you're in those places. You don't really think about it much, when you, but it stands out when you start looking for it. You'd mentioned about like the holly, but around here, we've got quite a bit of like bush honeysuckle and stuff like that, and you can tell a lot of times where it's browsed really heavily, or you get some other desirable species that are some of your shrubs and that kind of things that are getting just demolished, where there's really nothing in anything of deer height in their reach. But yeah, utilization cages are another way to really get a good gauge on that too, for just the overall numbers that I think is kind of overlooked. And I've done that kind of on accident, more or less with protecting trees. I don't typically put the utilization out, but it is always kind of a good idea to just kind of see the value in what your plot's actually producing too. But gives you a good idea there. And then some of the other factors, at least around us, is you'll see some of that extended rut activity. If you've got a little too many on the doe side, it seems, at least from my take, I feel like some of the secondary and later type, what people often refer to as a second rut, where it's a lot of times those younger does that are just coming into their first cycle. But we can our numbers are so low that on the does anyway, that you can get pretty familiar with those individual does and start to kind of backdate them based on your trail camera history and some of the fawning dates. You can back them up, and you kind of know, hey, this one's coming in October, and a lot of times your cameras will kind of support that. But you kind of learn, and it can pull every buck in the neighborhood right in on her when she's in, and that's the beauty of it when you've got such a tight buck to doe ratio. It can be really intense, and that's the great thing about having it so close. And I feel pretty lucky to have that, to be honest. But at the same time, I do see some value in having some more numbers there too.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things you just mentioned made me realize, why should you harvest does off your property? Well, like Jake was talking about earlier, we want to get that carrying capacity down. We want there to be enough. We want there to be more food than there are mouths to feed. We don't want our bucks getting insufficient nutrition. We don't want any of our deer getting insufficient nutrition. So that's obviously a big one. But the second one would be your rut is going to be more intense if you have a tighter buck to doe ratio. So if you've got a ratio that's out of whack, like you were saying just a second ago, your rut is going to be more drawn out. It's going to be less intense. Which I don't know about you guys, but the reason I like to hunt the rut is because of the intensity of it. Like those good rut days are the intense days. Jake, talk to me a little bit about when it comes to harvesting a doe. Say a guy wants to either harvest them in the early season or the late season or whatever, and we'll maybe talk about the merits of that here in just a second. But which doe are you going to suggest that they harvest? Like, does it really matter what doe they take?
So I guess it kind of depends on the property in the population. So if you have a lot of deer in the area, and the goal is I want to try to remove as many mouths, like you said, off the out of the area as possible, then you probably want to be shooting one of those older does, because they're going to produce more fawns, and they're also going to not only produce more fawns, but they're going to be able to protect those fawns. They can hide them a lot better than those younger moms. They're going to have better spots for them, so their fawns are going to have a higher survival rate. So if you can take out the old mom, then you're going to be lowering the numbers in your area more than if you're targeting like a doe fawn, or if you're targeting like a year and a half old mom. So it does matter a little bit if you're really trying to lower numbers, but really if you're just trying to go out there and shoot a couple does to keep the population in check, don't think too hard about it. Just try not to shoot a button buck, or like Dylan said, a buck that has already dropped, depending on when you're hunting.
Right, right. Whether that be early season or late season or something like that. So let's talk then about that timing. When do you like to shoot your does? I mean, I know I talked in the last episode. Those first couple of weeks of the season can be really, really good for us. We're poking in, just barely getting into our plots that are a little bit safer. hunting those typically in the afternoon, and we have really good buck activity in those plots, especially early on. Once that starts to taper off, then we start considering, okay, let's harvest some does out of this plot and, kind of regroup for the year. Uh, Others like to shoot them early season, others like to shoot them late season. Why don't you guys maybe share kind of the merits of both of those and what you maybe personally like to do?
So there's going to be benefits to both, and I, if you hunt in the early season for does, you kind of get it out of the way, and then also, like you said, you're going to have maybe a little bit more of a competitive rut because there's not as many does on the property. Not as so if a buck is done bringing a doe, he might have to search a little bit harder for that next one, and that just might bring him by your stand. So hunting does early has advantages. For me, the older I get, the less risks I take, and I know that if I target a doe early, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, you shoot her near the property line and she runs only a 30 to 50 yards, dies, and then you can get her out easy. But that doesn't always happen. We've tracked my neighbor's deer clear through our property before, and just because she's a doe doesn't mean she's going to lay down really quick. She could run a long ways, and so that's the last thing that I want to do on my property is shoot one by the property line and end up tracking her 800 yards through my property, messing everything up, leaving all of our scent in there when I was trying to keep it, more pressure free. That's kind of why I was hunting towards the perimeter. So for me, I don't really take that risk early season with doe hunting. I save most of or all of our doe harvesting for mid December. We have a just an antlerless season in December. That's when I do most of mine. That we even take like hunters that don't really have an opportunity to hunt private land. If they want to shoot a doe, they want venison for their family. We take them out, and I think you guys had mentioned giving to charity or giving to needy. Like we also like the NDA, the local branch near us, sponsors a I'll call it a donation. So the group of us, we get together over the course of a weekend. We harvest as many does as we can, and then we donate all that meat to I think it's Sportsmen Against Hunger, and so all that venison goes to needy families in the area. So we do most of our doe harvesting in the later half of the season, or really the last couple weeks of the season.
Okay. And Dylan, how are you giving guidance to maybe your clients, or I know Dylan's not drawing back on a doe this year, but if you're giving guidance to a
Well,
client, what are you going to tell them to do?
and I'm a little bit burned by a kind of a past experience I had. One of the biggest bucks, actually, it is the biggest buck that I'd passed, and my daughter was with me, and I kind of kicked myself to this day for not taking him. But ended up the following year, I had a pretty good peg on him, and he blew up. He was really good, but we had a doe that was just a fit, and so that was one of them early season opportunities, and she come out and she was just notorious. I mean, she was, I don't even know how old she was, to be honest, but I kind of already had my mind made up and had a tag that year for that potential. And I didn't want to, but when she decided to kind of alert the field, it's a spot that we didn't have figured out at the time. We've got it a lot better now, but it was a tough early season setup, and she pegged us, and yeah, I let her have it. It was kind of a crazy deal. I ended up got it on video, but as she was going down, she was going up into the bedding thicket. I'm like, no, and luckily she turns, and we had seen a couple coyotes that night, but right on her tail are two coyotes, and they're taking her down as she's going down, and so that was kind of a neat experience with my daughter. However, I look back and I probably should have that year before. If I'd have shot that deer, that would have been pretty neat. But I guess I'm burnt by that situation because that didn't end up working out. That deer ended up kind of playing a little bit of a tough to get there early, and then I didn't have a chance to hunt him there later. But it's one of them where as far as working with clients, I kind of promote that later season, and I would have in that situation as well. But I figured, man, she's already messed up the night. We might as well just go all out. And so yeah, I think late season. The only problem with the late season around us is you can start congregating deer. So I mean, just as long as you have a good gauge on the area and know that you're not, doing more damage. But if you're kind of overpopulated and you've got them kind of in that same area, and I think that'd be a great time to do it. Like I said, just kind of being careful of that antler drop, that situation. But yeah, a little practice, I think you'd be able to recognize them pretty easy then. But yeah, early away from stuff or late would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So let's talk about then just real quick. And both of you have alluded to it in your answers already, but if you're going to be harvesting does, what are the kinds of setups where you're going to find yourself? Because I'm guessing they maybe look a little bit different than, you know, your setups for a target buck.
Yeah, for me, in talking about that early setup, what I would be designing is kind of a setup, and maybe more of something just a temporary setup, such as even a pop up ground blind, something that's, if you're unable to draw them, beyond that, or maybe not have the trees in those type of areas. I think that'd be a great way to do it, or in an area where you may have some open field setups where you're not going to disturb too much going in. I'm thinking about recovery, just like Jake's mentioned, and the damage you're going to do. So that'd be at least my input.
Right. Jake, how about you?
So for us, it's primarily late season. So I really like what
Yep.
Dylan said there with early season. For us with the late season, it's all about the food source. So we're kind of sitting back off the food source, and we can hunt with rifles at that time of the year. So really, the distance isn't really an issue. So we don't have to get as close as we need to like we do during the pre-rut. Right, we have to get within 25 yards of this buck. So with doe hunting, we can really just kind of sit back, wait for these deer to kind of filter out into that food source. I'm not really worried about a buck at that point. Like there might be one within the timber somewhere, but that's okay. We're kind of most of the time done with our buck hunting at that point. We're shifting our focus to does, and so if we spook one, it's not that big of a deal in our eyes. But we are just sitting back on a food source. So we're in a really kind of comfy hunting. We're in a house with a heater, waiting for these does to show up, and then when they pile out, then you kind of pick the biggest one and pull the trigger.
Yeah, I've got to say, there's something about it. Now, I love, a well designed spot. I love getting out on public land and finding just the right crossing or whatever to hunt, just the right bedding area to get downwind of. But I also love going and sitting in a shooting house with a can of Coke and a Pop Tart and one of my kids,
Yeah.
and and just waiting for the does to step out into
Yeah.
the field. There's just something, with a gun in my hands. There's just something about that. It takes me back to kind of the origins of my hunting, like where everything kind of started. And yeah, there's just a different level of excitement and enjoyment. And like you said, it's easy and comfy,
Mhm. That's
Who
definitely not where
who can
my hunting
argue?
started. Comfy. Yeah,
Oh,
that's like new for me. So my son's kind of
that's
grown
right.
up different a little bit than me, but I like that though, like because when you're taking a kid hunting, you don't want to take him out when it's 20 degrees and you're waiting for this deer to show up and his toes are freezing. He's not having a good time. And if you really want your kids to, you know, continue to want to go hunting, you have to make sure that it's an enjoyable experience. And so
Right.
enjoyable, there's a lot that goes into that. One, comfort is huge. So comfortable stand or comfortable blind. Also temperature, good gear. Like if you're outside, you have to make sure they're warm. But like, that's where the blind hunting is so nice because the comfort is taken care of. And then two, you have to be able to see deer. Like if you take them out hunting for 3 days and they don't see a deer, it's going to be really difficult to convince those kids to want to go out again. So that's where that doe hunt can be really fun to take a new hunter out or a kid because a lot of times if you have your property set up correctly, you have that late season food source, you're going to see deer, and that's why you're there, to see deer. It'd be like going fishing and not catching a fish. It'd be pretty
Right.
tough to want to go
Right.
again.
Yeah, that's good. I think back to last year. I took my son out for a hunt, and we had all the gear. We had an iPad with us for just in case, with some headphones in case we needed to break that out. We had snacks, we had drinks, we had comfortable clothing and all that stuff. And we ended up harvesting a doe that night. It's the first doe that I've shot with my son. Ended up being a fantastic hunt. We got to watch deer in the field underneath the feeder. This is Alabama, so we could use feeders.
Hmm.
Um, and we got to watch deer under the feeder and chase each other around. And we got to see two little bucks come out. And he's, Dad, why don't we shoot that one? So I explained a little bit, like, buddy, if you had this gun, I'd let you be all over it, but that's not one that we're after. And then a bigger one came out, and he's like, how about that one? Like, nope, not one more year, And then also just got to talk about responsible doe management. So our does down that far south are being born in September, late September. And so when we were out, we've got a very, very tiny fawn came out with a doe. Not even close to being weaned. I mean, like I said, our rut's February rolling into March, so it's really, really late. And then one came out without a fawn, and we got to talk about all of that. And so yeah, there's something to be said for easy, comfortable doe hunting, especially when you're introducing kids to the sport. But hey, it's just a lot of fun. So, guys, anything else we need to cover when we're talking about doe harvest, or getting ready for maybe a doe mission? If somebody wants to go in, take them out, get their carrying capacity, or get the herd back within the carrying capacity without doing too much damage to their hunting for the rest of the season. Any other tips or tricks?
One thing I'd like to end with, Josh, at least on my take, is I wish we could convey this to the antis, the passion that we all have for the outdoors and what we're doing here. Nature is brutal. We don't really want it to take its own course, and especially on your own properties when you're trying to design these to the maximum potential. That's there's a lot of different successes. For me, there's a lot of enjoyment in being able to carry those doe groups and family groups, in different portions of your property, to where you can maximize that, and that's success. Whether you reach it with antler potential or the bucks or not, I mean, there's a lot of satisfaction in that as a land manager, and I think that's one thing that just gets a little bit overshadowed. A lot of the stuff we talk about is a little bit morbid, but at the same time, we all have that passion and the deep desire, to make sure we have healthy populations. And so it's neat to listen to different perspectives across the country, though. So I know everybody has their different challenges.
Yep, that's really, really good. And to that point, if you have too many deer, the first thing to go is going to be the high quality native plants and plant community on your parcel. I've got a property. It's about 1,000 acres. Not my property; it's a client property. It's about 1,000 acres. And the first time we ever rode the property together, we saw nearly 100 deer. Just deer running, and I was like, "What is going on?" He's like, "They're like rats around here." But he also has nothing left except for non-native grasses that he's planted for cattle and Chinese privet. I'm not sure if you guys have privet where you're at, but there's privet everywhere, and the deer had eaten a browse line in the privet. I was like, "Sir, this is a desert. You've got nothing left." Like we've got some serious work to do. But you're right. It is not just harvesting does. It's also taking care of the land and caring for creation. So, Jake, anything else to add?
No, I think that was it. Just understand that not every property is the same. Some properties have to harvest more does than others, or that's for sure. Some properties have to harvest more does than others, and some don't have to harvest any does at all, and that's okay. So sometimes you
Right.
see posts like, hey, we got to go out there and harvest as many does as possible, and that is true on some properties, but there's also areas where you don't have to harvest any, and that's fine too. So just understand that every property is different. Just make sure you're paying attention to the numbers either visually on camera, and then some of the identifiers that you guys talked about earlier with either food plots or some of the browse on your property. Obviously, the preferred browse is going to get hit, but if you start noticing some of that unpreferred, like around here, it's like, I don't know, ironwood, beech. If you start noticing those getting browsed on, or for you, I'm not sure what it's down in Georgia, but those undesirables, those low
Yeah.
low protein, low mineral content in those plants, like that's if those are getting hit, you probably have a little bit of a doe problem, or maybe a sunlight problem, or a combination of both. But every
Right.
property is different.
Yeah, that's such a good point to drive home. Good point to end on. And your property may be different year to year. Depending on what goes on. I know you guys actually have to worry about this thing called winter. We don't really get that down here, but sometimes you can have a strong winter kill in the northern portions of Michigan or Wisconsin or some of those other Minnesota. Winters can be hard on the deer, and it may vary from time to time. Out west, drought that can be hard on deer from time to time. So every property is different. Every year on your property can be different. So make sure to be paying attention to that. Guys, thank you for joining me tonight. Folks, thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, go check out our YouTube channel. Go check out our website. Go check us out on social media. We're all over the place. We got a lot of good content coming your way.